So I'm going to start with the quick economic update, and then we'll get going. We'll get back to Emily and George as well. We'll answer some of the main questions that we've got here. But economic update. Okay, unemployment rate in Texas for December, 7.2%. That's good news. It's down from 8.1% in November. Houston's unemployment is still a little higher than the state as a whole, but at least we're trending in the right direction. Part of the reason is we've been reluctant to impose, for the reason I mean for the trending in the right direction and the relatively low rate, even with the devastation to our energy sector. It's because Governor Abbott has been reluctant to impose on scientific lockdowns that have pummeled businesses in other states. And man, we'll repeat this over and over again. They don't work. They do not work. The data in hindsight, look, I can forgive people at first for, a couple weeks, even a month to slow the spread. But in hindsight, they just don't work. There's no correlation between COVID case trends and lockdown policies. There just isn't. You can do much lower cost lockdowns and still get the, meaning some restrictions here and there. Maybe don't have concerts indoors, but for the most part, you don't really have to lock down businesses or restaurants. It's just the truth that we see in the data. So really feel bad for other economies that have done that. So glad our state has done that. We still had a bad impact though. Leisure and hospitality industry have been the hardest hit. Employment there is, employment in that sector has declined by about 12% over the last year. By November of last year, the Texas leisure and hospitality industry lost 181,000 jobs and 37% of all Texas job losses since November 2019. Restaurants and bars suffered the heaviest losses, falling by 10% or 112,000 jobs. That's a lot. This is why it's so critical for Congress to provide targeted relief. I say that a lot today, to help businesses keep their doors open and their employees paid. Houston businesses received more than $9.4 billion in financial assistance under the PPP program as of December of last year, and this supported about 700,000 jobs in the region. As of February 7th, the Paycheck Protection Program, or the PPP, has provided a total of $623 billion in relief and approved 6 million loans since the program's inception. In December, Congress provided $284 billion in new loan authority, which can be fully forgiven if proceeds are used for allowable expenses during a selected 8-week or 24-week period that begins after the proceeds are received. So far this year, the program has issued over $100 billion in new loans. That includes both first and second draws. For restaurants, bars, and hotels specifically, Congress has not passed a direct grant program, but we did provide preferential treatment under the second draw PPP loans. An eligible restaurant or hotel determines its second draw PPP loan amount by choosing an average monthly payroll option and multiplying that figure by 3.5. Other types of businesses are limited to multiplying this figure by 2.5, but eligible restaurants and hotels have increased access to these PPP funds. The maximum PPP second draw loan available to any business is $2 million. Unfortunately, my Democrat colleagues in Congress would rather focus on unrelated, progressive policy priorities rather than keeping small businesses open and their employees paid, even though that's what they lead with. That's what they say they're doing. It mostly has nothing to do with that. The majority of the latest COVID relief bill had nothing to do with recovering from the pandemic, and that's pretty unfortunate because if they worked with us, on common sense targeted relief for the businesses that need it, the small businesses, and efforts to just boost the vaccine rollout, we could have delivered a bipartisan bill to the president's desk. Another unfortunate fact is the Democrats are pushing hard for a $15 minimum wage. Look, it's not going to happen this time. That's the good news. Let's get that. The parliamentarian just ruled on that. But look, they're going to pass it. They're going to pass that law out of the House at some point. They did it in the last session. And what will that do? Why is, everybody, like the Democrats are really good at this. They're the Equality Act, the COVID relief package. I mean, why would you be against that? I mean, the name sounds so nice. Why would you be against it? Well, because policy matters. And, as Americans, we have to stop letting ourselves get tricked by platitudes and nice sounding things. We have to stop letting ourselves get bribed by false promises. The easiest thing to do as a politician that who controls spending and policy is to promise you things. And it's easy to do because you don't have to live with the long-term consequences of that bad policy that doesn't work, policy that puts your kids in unsustainable debt. And then there's even more dangerous policy like $15 minimum wage. So because people don't understand how a small business works, and they have now if you explain it to them, they do, and it's everybody's job on this call to please explain it to those who aren't on the call and people the minimum wage hike to that fast and that high to $15 an hour, it kills about 1.4 million jobs. That's at the median estimate. The CBO's higher estimate is almost 4 million jobs. And plenty of other economic estimates say it'll be far worse. The CBO doesn't use dynamic scoring, so there's a good chance it'll be far worse. I talked to a lot of small businesses, and across the board, they either the choice is really simple. You either close or you lay off workers. There's nothing in between. It hurts young workers the most. It replaces workers with machines. It reduces family incomes and raises consumer prices. All of those things are just economic facts. Young workers the most. Why? Because they're the most likely to be working at a minimum wage job. They're not providing for a whole family. People don't realize that. People envision a parent providing for their whole family with minimum wage. This just isn't true. And the statistic is just not true. It's usually somebody just adding to their monthly income with a separate minimum wage job. That's usually what it is, or it's a young person in high school doing it, getting their first job. And now they just don't have that option because an employer says, well, you're not worth that much money. You're doing this job that just isn't worth that much money to me. I can't afford it. We'll talk about that in a lot of depth, and we'll definitely ask Emily to say a little bit more about it as well. We'll get to questions here in a second. Is there anything to add, Emily or George, before we get to questions, or do you want to get straight to questions?
Yeah, I think we can get to questions.
Okay. First one is for me, from Mark. How can we make sure that the federal aid meant for small businesses actually goes to small businesses? That's an alarm going off. It's not like a bad alarm. It's just the alarm for the House floor. This is what happens when they're calling votes. So I think we still have plenty of time. Yeah.
How many rings is it? It's like 6 rings?
Never know.
Rings?
I never know. Okay. It's different every time. It is very strange. I can't figure it out. So
that was 5.
Yeah, it's confusing. So, okay, how do we make sure that this aid actually goes to small businesses with the PPP program? We saw a lot of businesses with hundreds of employees receive aid that was meant for smaller, struggling businesses. As far as initial PPP failings go, what has been learned? Okay. Well, no program is perfect. Obviously, it's gotten improved a lot. It was getting improved on a daily basis. I mean, I think the SBA should get a lot of, and the Department of the Treasury should get a lot of credit for what they did to just make that work in that initial rollout where all the money went out like that. But it's been recalibrated since then, and to an enormous extent. And not perfect. I understand there's issues with the second draw process that need to be fixed. There's still money in it right now, not getting spent. So that tells me that so Democrats just want to add more money into the pot. That's so stupid. It should tell a policymaker that what needs to happen is you need to liberalize it more and expand access to it. But that's not what Democrats want to do. So we've taken specific suggestions over the months from constituents, shared that with the SBA and with the Small Business Committee so we can clarify these things. Since the program's inception, over 7 million loans have been issued, totaling over $600 billion. Just this year, about 2 million have been issued. And the average loan size for the program is $73,000. 71% of the loans were for $50,000 or less, according to data this year. Some of the reasons that larger businesses may have had an easier time navigating the system is less about the program, how it was structured, but the fact that they just had existing relationships with banks. Yep. We're just looking at second draw loans. There's been 1.3 million loans with an average size of about $96,000. So, but to get to the stories about big businesses getting loans, keep in mind, just because somebody receives a $2 million loan, it also doesn't mean they'll get forgiveness. So this year there's been fewer than 200 loans above 200 or above 2 million. And out of the millions issued, the loan, and the loan forgiveness process is intended to be for smaller businesses. I would also say, this is important too. An American that works at a bigger restaurant is not less important than an American that works at a small restaurant or business. And so I remember months and months and months ago when this was really hitting home for a lot of people. And I thought to myself, I don't quite understand why. 10 employees laid off from the kitchen of Buffalo Wild Wings. They are just as important to me as a small standalone mom and pop restaurant. They're all important. And it is just not the case that just because you're a restaurant chain, they could easily make up for it. And I don't know why people thought that necessarily. Like the goal should be to get everybody what they need. And it seems to me that it's happening mostly now because there's still money in the pot. So I just want to make that clear. But we should be liberalizing the standards on that money. I know, like for instance, there's a restaurant in my district that they don't quite make the 35% cutoff for revenue loss, but they're still at like 28%, and it's really tough on them. So, why not lower that to maybe 20% just to at least spend the rest of the money on these small businesses. And there's a few other restrictions too that really make it for smaller businesses as well. Long answer.
Yeah, and Dan, I'll add, I think this week, SBA starting Wednesday, it's if 20 or less employees, the only new applications SBA is processing for 14 days. And so that's just to get a little window, because the point you made, we found this across Texas, our small restaurants did not have banking relationships. Mm-hmm. So if you already had one, you were first in line, you got well cared for, you're a little mom and pop operator trying to pull all your paperwork together, you don't have that relationship. It's very common for us. You just missed the boat. So this time around, there's this like 2-week pause. If your loan is already in there, you're good to go. It's going to get processed. We can talk about all the reasons why they're not getting processed right now if they're large, but then if you're small, you have this 2 weeks to get in there. And I would say for all restaurants, if you don't have banking relationship, come to the TRA. We've got a good partner we can send you to. But that was really what happened last time, is people just got shut out because they did not have someone to go to, even though our regional community banks in Texas did an amazing job of getting money out. They were heroes in this. We still had so many on the sidelines.
Great. George, anything to add to that point?
No, I echo everything that you said and that Emily just said. I think that the same applies here. Obviously, the focus was on our smaller employees. There were some success stories, no doubt about it, as far as our smaller retailers that were able to navigate the system that first time around. But there were plenty of roadblocks as well. So, yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the impact of raising the minimum wage. This especially affects the restaurant industry. So Emily, you and I, we talked about this a little bit, I think, before we went live. What's the impact of raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour and altering the tip credit? And maybe explain the tip credit to people on both restaurants and restaurant workers.
Yeah, I think, we always say everything in life is about timing. And so for us to, we're glad the Senate parliamentarian came in with the view she did, because attaching an increase in labor costs to a stimulus bill at its face value just doesn't make sense. But second, to increase labor costs on a restaurant industry that has been pummeled through this, and I would argue likely the hardest hit, the data shows this, whether it be loss of businesses or loss of employees, it'd be really tough to explain that. And I think George and I both said, we love to have a wage conversation. This is not a heck no, but it was about timing. And for us, the tip credit was critical. And I'll tell you, it was even more critical for employees. So let's just say in Houston, you're at a Papados and you make your $2.16 an hour as a restaurant worker and you're serving. And it's a Friday night, you're often on average going home at $40 to $50 an hour because you earn tips from the customer based on both your service and the guest checked average. We have employees that make significant amounts of money in our sector. It's why they stay in our industry. And I think what was scary about this was to eliminate that, you've just taken away all incentive for that employee. And in some cases, the restaurant industry is the only place they can work. They're a single mother. They can only work in the evening. They can only work on the weekend, whatever that might be, the flexibility we provide. You've just said to them, you will never make more than this wage. And they're used to making 2 to 3 times that. And so not only would it be harmful to the restaurant because you've increased our labor costs 4 times, but you've just taken a very large percentage of the workforce in this nation and reduced their income. And that was scary. And I can tell you where we got the most traction is going to our servers, going to our wait staff and saying, do you know this could happen? And we've got op-eds that have come out like crazy, and the employees want to have the conversation to say, don't take my tips, right? I can actually have a livable wage doing this. And so, that was very, very concerning. And I think the 15 was just the rapid rate they wanted to increase without real explanation. And we look at the same data you did. Like we look at places like San Francisco and Portland and parts of Seattle where this has already increased. And we see the job loss of restaurants. Those are real jobs. And so at a time when we've had, in Texas, we had 750,000 employees laid off in mid-April out of work, right? Out of our 1.3 million. We still have about 111, 150 we're trying to get back. Yeah. Why would we do something to kill more jobs right now? Yeah. And so we were very much against this, and we're very happy. And you're right, it's going to come around again, and we'll keep having those conversations, but this was not the right time to do this to our industry.
There needs to be a real debate, hearings and everything on it. People are just not educated on what it means. Again, it sounds so simple. Oh, people just get paid more. Listen, there are no solutions in policy. There is only trade-offs. And that's a really important point to make about everything that we do. I want to ask the CBO, frankly, if they calculated that loss in wages. That's not something that gets brought up a lot. The fact that you might actually decrease wages because they're used to making more and because of the tip credit, et cetera. So you're actually capping people in many cases, and yes. In the restaurant industry specifically. That's a fascinating take on it. And because the CBO will say, well, you might, if you did this, you might increase, you might take like 900,000 people out of poverty, but 1.3 million are going to lose their jobs. And so Democrats see people are getting out of poverty though. And I'm like, okay, so no, what that means is they're maybe, frankly, because of what you just said, it's actually not that clear. But let's say it is, okay, so you increase somebody's wages by a few percentage points, but you're decreasing many more people's wages by 100% because they lose their jobs.
Correct.
Okay.
That's right.
George, what do retailers have to say about the minimum wage? There's not as much tipping in retail. Right. So how does it affect?
I'd agree with everything y'all said. I think you said it yourself earlier, Congressman, when you talked about the impact on young people. There's a lot of young people, their first time job is in a retail setting. So there's the impact on young people. There's regional differences that we've talked about a little bit. There's the whole move to automation, how it would increase move to automation and less in jobs. I think the one piece that is very appropriate for retail is a 1% to 2% margin business at best. So you're talking about a lot of small operators that are working on really, really thin margins, and having that cost of salaries and wages go up like that dramatically, it's got the potential to put your smaller, independent operators big duress, and in some cases put them out of business. And I'm sure the same applies to restaurants. So, I'll reiterate, we are not opposed to having a minimum wage conversation and to acknowledging that perhaps the minimum wage where it sits now is a little bit outdated and there needs to be some raising to it. But let's have a deliberative, thoughtful discussion that takes into account all of these things, so we on the right policy, the right target number, and the right sort of stair-step timing and incrementation for.
Yeah, and one last thing to add to this from a policy perspective is, look, I'll just be honest, I don't think there should be a federal minimum wage. I don't see how that makes sense. Not just because of the reasons we all just talked about, but because the cost of living is vastly different across the country, and it shouldn't be federalized. At the very least, there should be exceptions made for cost of living adjustments, things like that. I mean, hell, even in Houston, should the minimum wage be the same in downtown Houston as it is if you live up in Conroe? I mean, it's not even that far away, or Tomball. I mean, the cost of living is vastly different. Yep. So, you have to actually accommodate for that. Next question. Should businesses be concerned there may be a tax increase on the horizon? Yes, you should. So sorry. This is a long time promise of the Biden administration, and they're doing their best to defend it. I was reading something recently. They're defending this. it'll make us less competitive. I mean, what they're really looking at is a corporate tax hike. That's probably their favorite thing to do. And and again, this gets to the reason this might be politically feasible for them is because, on the right and the left, we have this problem where people think corporations must be evil. I don't know why. My question is why, compared to what? Why is it so wrong for a business to get bigger and employ more people? I honestly don't know. I don't know what's wrong with making money, but here's the thing: they want to increase it from 21% to 28%. For context, the Trump tax cuts brought it from like 35% to 21%, so a pretty big decrease. But also we had massive growth for a couple of years, and coupled with deregulation, you saw a very tight labor market. You saw wages increasing very rapidly. They increased at an exceptionally high rate for the lowest quintile of earners, because that's who businesses compete for, and they're also hurt the most when there's problems and when there's less growth. So this would put us back in the highest taxed country in the OECD. A couple of statistics that people don't know. We were previously the highest tax on corporations in the entire OECD, which means all developed countries like Europe, US, these kind of countries, Japan. Made us less competitive. We have the most progressive tax rate. We are number one, far and away, the most progressive tax system in the developing world, or the developed world, the most progressive. All right. If you listen to Democrats, you would think that we only tax just to help the rich. It's the opposite. Is the exact opposite is true. They are lying to you constantly. The other thing Biden has talked about is raising individual tax rate, the top individual tax rate, to 39%. So it's almost 40%. You have to understand what this means. And this is why it's immoral. I know people are rich and they live in River Oaks, and I would love there. I live in a little apartment. It'd be really cool to have a mansion in River Oaks. Does this make me upset? No. And we should stop giving in to this feeling of resentment because somebody has something better than we do. Maybe their parents gave it to them. Maybe they're very lucky. Maybe they're smarter than I am. Maybe they made decisions different. I made a decision to go in the military. Maybe they made a decision to study finance. I don't know. But I know I shouldn't be resentful for it. And I'm not so sure that it's moral to say to somebody, 40% of the time that you live on this earth is simply for the government. And it's actually not 40%, because that's just the federal tax rate. It's much more than that when it really, and in some states like California, you're looking at like 60%. So, is that moral to say like almost half the time that you exist, you're just paying the government? You're just literally working to give 100% of your time to money to the government? I don't know. I don't think that's moral, especially when we don't spend it very well. So anyway, that's just a comment on that. Capital gains, unrealized capital gains might go up too. So that would be pretty devastating. And people think too, oh, well, that's just the rich people because it's capital gains. No, it's not. Your 401k, your pensions, this stuff matters as well. A wealth tax. Senator Warren plans to introduce a $2.75 trillion wealth tax, which would discourage innovation and capital formation, would empower the IRS to maintain a list of individuals' assets. So again, punishing success, again, the left has this idea that there's there's something wrong with being successful and it should be punished. No, inequality is what drives them, and a concern for inequality. And at first you think, well, that makes them such nice people. But it's a distraction, because when you're concerned intensely with inequality, you're concerned with two things: rich people and poor people, and the difference between them. Why? Shouldn't you just be concerned with giving poor people opportunity, making sure that the barriers to that poor person reaching the level of a rich person is removed? That's what you should be doing. That's why we're having the conversation about minimum wage, for instance, because when you raise that minimum wage, you're actually removing that first rung on the ladder. That person can't make it up. There's this myth out there that there's like a segment of society that has been left behind for 40 years, that wages at the bottom level have never been raised in 40 years. Okay, so that makes people believe, when you hear that statistic, It's kind of true. It's really complicated, but it's kind of true. Depends on how you measure that. But here's the thing. They make you think that it's the same group of people. It's not. The reality is that the most likely person to rise above to the next quintile of earner is the lowest quintile of earner. They're the most likely in America to rise up. Because here's the thing, when you're looking at the bottom quintile of earners, you're including teenagers working, you're including people who aren't the head of households, you're including old people who are just on Social Security, but also might have a lot saved up. So, these statistics can be misleading, right? We have to focus on the people who are truly having problems getting by, who can't get the skills they need to get a higher wage. That's a better use of our time if we actually care about the poor. And I don't think the left does. I think they just hate the rich, and there's a difference. Okay, get off my soapbox. Emily, let's ask you a question. What percentages of restaurants and small businesses will remain permanently closed? That's a scary thought. And how will this change the industry or our economy? Do you think they'll be replaced? Do you think more investment will come in? What's going to happen?
Yeah, I think the sad truth is we've lost 11,000 small businesses in Texas. Those are restaurants since the crisis hit in March, right? So 11,000 restaurants have closed for good. And I would argue that with the storm fiasco last week, we could have even a higher percentage of those that were on the brink, right? That PPP didn't come in time, lost sales for 4 or 5 days. And so there's a couple of really important points about that number, though, is that yes, there's green shoots, and God bless Texas, because we see the number of restaurant companies from California, from New York that are starting to move here. And that's really good news, right? But we can't forget that out of no fault of their own, these small businesses have closed. And frankly, many of them consumed a massive amount of debt trying to save themselves. 37% of our restaurants were ready when this pandemic hit for drive-through, to go, and delivery. Other than that, on March 19th, they went dark. And so, you think about the innovation that had to occur. You think about the business models, alcohol to go, which we all love to talk about. I was with a restaurant last night. They made $3 million in alcohol to go. Who would have thought, right? Selling margaritas. So there was a lot of good that sort of happened over this last 11 months that's going to help our industry transform. But you have to remember the jobs. We hire someone to, George's point, you're 15, you're midlife, you're coming out of prison, you're retired and want to be a greeter, right? We don't care where you are in your life, we will hire you. And I think that some of the numbers that are just sort of astonishing to people is that more women and more minorities are in management roles in our industry than any industry in America. So these jobs matter, right? And 9 out of 10 restaurants employ less than 50 people. So these are the small businesses, Congressman, in your community that I would argue if we don't save them and we don't start to rebuild and invest in them, and we can't forget, we have put more burdens on restaurants than anyone else, right? So you can open, but you got to have 6 feet of spacing. You can only do it this way. You've got to have mask gloves, who knows what day of the week it is. The consumers are scared to come in because the media made the restaurants the whipping child for all things. And to date, if someone can find me the evidence that restaurants spread COVID, I'd love to see it, because to this date, it's all hyperbole. But literally almost destroyed an entire industry based on that because we needed some villain in the story. And so I was with the Workforce Commission last week, and the head of the board said, if we don't recover these jobs, I'd argue the Texas economy isn't going to recover. And that's going to take all of us leaning in, because we are still losing these businesses. And these are moms and dads, and the kids go to school here. I mean, these are not, as you said, these big corporations. Yeah, we've lost franchisees, and I would argue they're just as important as an independent restaurant. But we just can't, as we see new restaurants emerge, we can't forget the number of losses we have experienced just in this state, and nationally. It's 120,000 small businesses have closed, restaurants. That's an unbelievable number.
Well, thank you for that. George, I want to go from me to you. We're going through a lot of these questions. There's a lot of really good ones. I wish we could do all of them. This one's good. George, this is from Diane. I co-own office buildings. How do you see the future need for physical office space changing? It seems as though smaller businesses are getting back into the office much quicker than large companies who are still largely teleworking.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that's a really good observation. The smaller companies or smaller stores that, got to have their people in place, got to make their business function, have, more often than not been more, regular in their offices. Maybe they're not as 100% where they were, this time last year, but close to it. I think larger corporations and larger companies, and it certainly is evident for the corporate offices of a lot of our large members, they're all largely teleworking for the most part, with very rare exceptions. And many of them have forecasts to do so until at least June or July. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see. I think in answer to the first part of her question, will things change in terms of, you know, commercial office footprint? Yeah, without a doubt. It just depends on, you know, the industry, maybe the location, what the needs of that business are. But I think it will not be the same as it was 11 or 12 months ago.
Okay.
Agreed.
I'm seeing a lot of questions too about ERCOT and energy stuff. And I will remind everybody, we did a long podcast on this last week. So just check out that for better answers there. There was one question that I can't help it. I want to hit it. The Wall Street Journal did an analysis that said Texans paid an average of $28 billion more than other states. Some people would quibble with that because our average price of energy is still far lower than the average in the United States. So look, I think there's probably going to need to be changes to the way we do our pricing mechanisms in ERCOT. The state legislatures having hearings, I think, today about that, doing it all. They're 100% focused on this. The main problem is not enough baseload power energy. Okay, what does that mean? It means baseload means energy that can be turned on like that. There's only 3 kinds that can do that. Really, only 2. It's only coal and nuclear, to be honest, because gas, actually, you need to bring it in. It's not on-site storage. So, but gas, nuclear, and coal are reliable. Renewables are not reliable. They just aren't. It's not renewables' fault that, you know, we lost power, because we weren't expecting them to be online. So it's confusing, but it is kind of renewables' fault because we invest too much money in that. We're not investing any money in baseload power. So that's the big, and part of that is because of the pricing mechanisms we use at ERCOT favor renewable energy vastly. So everybody's like, oh, it's because you crazy Texans and your deregulation and your, you just care about oil. It's like, it's actually the opposite. The opposite is the problem. We care too much about renewables and wind specifically. So that's the quick answer to that. We'd have to dive more into the Wall Street Journal analysis, because on average we do pay less. So it's kind of an interesting talk. All right. Well, here's a question, which is a good one too, which relates more to what we're trying to talk about. What changes has Biden made to the existing programs like PPP? So the administration has been focused mostly on the second draw loans and other changes as part of the December relief bill. Remember, we passed that under President Trump. That was a bipartisan bill. Everybody got really mad about it. But there's a lot of misinformation about the bill. I've addressed that in past videos, but it was basically bipartisan and probably pretty helpful, pretty targeted. It also included some changes to forgiveness documents and processes, which does influence the borrower's timing of applying for forgiveness. So the most important are tax deductibility of expenses, and it's a simplified forgiveness process for loans of $150,000 or less, the expansion of eligible costs, and borrower's ability to select its covered period within 8 to 24 weeks. In addition, they're making some modest changes that are worth mentioning. The Biden administration instituted a 2-week period that started on Wednesday, during which only businesses with fewer than 20 employees will be able to apply for PPP loans. I think Emily mentioned that. They also made some slight changes, the PPP loan calculation formula to help sole proprietors, independent contractors, and self-employed individuals, help them to receive more financial support. Also eased eligibility requirements for some business owners, for example, by eliminating a restriction preventing small business owners with prior non-fraud felony convictions from obtaining relief through the PPP. The application window for the current $284 billion iteration of PPP is scheduled to close March 31st, and there's still funding available. Okay, let's go to Emily. Are there avenues or resources outside of PPP that small businesses can access for aid? Are there other organizations that are helping small businesses get back on their feet? We all know about Barstool Sports, but it's probably pretty tough to get a loan from them. It's small. Anything else, Emily, that people can look to?
I would say, another part of the bill, they all passed the sort of reconfiguring some of the SBA 7A loans. And so we have a lot of businesses that are looking to try to refinance potentially. Some of the new terms are very favorable, and I think people are overlooking that. And then one of the elements that I think is critical is the employee retention tax credit. There is a way to use the PPP and the ERTC together. And we know a lot of restaurants and a lot of small businesses are overlooking this, which is essentially up to $14,000 for the first 2 quarters of 2021, based on having a 25% loss rate and retaining those employees. And so it's an incredible, could be a gift for a lot of small businesses that are frankly just overlooking it. And so we've been trying to get this word out. Also in the House bill, I think you'll all pass this weekend, that's looking to be extended to the end of Q4. And that's really about keeping your people on the books and keeping them paid, but taking care of that benefit. And so I would say to make sure if you're not looking at that you look at that now, if you have hit that 25% loss year over year. I think it could be significant. And then I would say on the restaurants specifically, and I know Congressman, I believe you're a supporter of this, I hope, is the Restaurants Act, which is that $25 billion of this, which is actually dedicated, I think a small part of that bill, to restaurants. And it would open up grants for those 20 or less and really provide additional stimulus to get them through. And it's really 2019 over 2020 loss. And so it's going to go to the ones that were the hardest hit. And we're really hopeful that will pass as well.
Great. George, let's go to you, and we'll ask this question that we got. What costs have retailers incurred as a result of COVID? Just operations being shut down, safety improvements to open, that is of course cost. And just generally, how are they impacting business? Is there a way to be compensated for extra expenses that companies have had to incur during COVID-19, whether you're purchasing masks or sanitizers?
So it really ranges from those that were non-essential, had to be closed, for about a 6 to 8 week period last spring. Mainly your department stores, your specialty stores, jewelry stores. If they weren't selling an essential item or weren't deemed an essential business, they were closed. So there was certainly costs there that they had to recoup. But then for everybody else who's been open, it's the cost of retrofitting your stores and outfitting your employees with PPE, the masks, the gowns, the gloves, the face shields, the markings and signage at the stores, the shields at the registration counter and at other places around the store. So and those are ongoing sort of costs too. I mean, they're not like a one-time thing. If this had been a 6 to 8 week event, then okay, but it's been ongoing for about a year now. So stores and retailers have had to continually invest in health and safety kind of measures to stay open, to keep their employees safe, to keep their customers safe, and to be able to meet the needs of the community. So in terms of being reimbursed, I think one thing we're very, very big on, and it's one of our TRA legislative priorities at the federal level this year, is the passage of the Safe and Healthy Workplace Tax Credit, which was a bill introduced last session by your colleague from South Carolina, Mr. Price. We're really pushing to have it introduced again, or even have it included in a subsequent COVID relief package, because it would help industries like retail, restaurants, schools that have heavily invested in protective equipment, not only for their physical location, but for their employees, be able to recoup some of those costs, especially when they've been operating at a reduced occupancy.
Right. Okay, here's one that's related, but kind of from Norman. How will Biden's decision on the border and immigration affect small businesses? Well, look, we got to have a reasonable discussion on how to reform and modernize visa programs, which would give businesses some certainty at least.
That's right.
And look, it's pretty obvious that a lot of small businesses and restaurants use immigrants to staff, and it's either high school students or immigrants. Doesn't seem like a whole lot else in between. That's just a fact, and but it also means that it does not mean that you just let them through the border, because all that means is that they're just cutting in line in front of the people who actually wait for visas. And that's just really frustrating. The Democrats used to agree with this. I mean, Bernie Sanders used to be like a real big on border security and not letting cheap labor come in and compete with American labor, because it does drive down labor wages. That's just an economic fact. You can't get around that fact. And so instead of fighting for reasonable change to maybe work visas, it seems like what they really want is as many people here as possible sneak through some kind of amnesty program, get them to vote, and then be in power forever. That seems to be more the case. They've stopped border wall construction. They've ended the Remain in Mexico policy. So the Remain in Mexico policy just means we send back a lot of people to Mexico City, and this is an agreement with the Mexican government. So it just disincentivizes this crossing, because in the past you would cross, claim amnesty for something. It doesn't matter if it's not true, because you're gonna have to come back for court later on, and they would just let you go. And under Trump, we finally eliminated that process and kind of got a handle on it. Biden has completely reversed it immediately. There's going to be a crisis down at the border very soon, kind of already happening. We're going to be down there on March 6th to do what I always do. We're going to go kind of do a guerrilla documentary and show people what's really going on. They also want to provide citizenship for 11 million illegal immigrants. That's just an estimate, by the way. It could be much more. And this is unsustainable, and it's not moral. It's not correct, because look, a lot of people have come to, my stepmother, family, friends who have come to this country legally, done it the right way, spent years trying to get here. My grandmother, coming from Austria in the early 1900s, coming here, it took her years to get here. This really makes immigrants mad. That's why I think we're seeing more Republican voters in South Texas. These are Hispanic voters. Mm-hmm. Biden also put a 100-day pause on deportations, which, why? Obama didn't even do that. Obama was all about just like break the law, get out. Not Biden. U.S. District Judge in Texas recently issued an injunction halting this pause, but this is very temporary. So there's only so much we can do to fight it. Our attorney generals and our attorney general in Texas is really fighting this. We need others too as well. Biden administration plan is not focused on streamlining visa programs. So again, you can have a conversation about that, but that's not even the conversation they want to have. They just want citizenship right now because empathy and stuff like that. That's basically their reasoning. Look, businesses need to bring it back to businesses. Businesses need certainty, and look, I'm a big fan of simply requiring E-Verify as a way to do it. But I understand that a lot of businesses, if you're going to do that, you need to have a more flexible, at least maybe a flexible visa program that's kind of that's maybe related to unemployment as well. So, Republicans are willing to have these conversations and go through these ideas, but border security is non-negotiable. And I don't know why Democrats are so much in favor of an open border. All right, Emily, what some people have asked about this one. I've seen a couple questions about it. Talk about liability shields. And I want to know, are we seeing a lot of lawsuits? This has been a big Republican priority for a while, to bring liability shields to businesses for COVID-related lawsuits. What are you guys seeing?
Yeah, so this was a big priority of ours, and actually Senator Cornyn, our own in Texas, carried a bill for us that we really were hopeful was going to get over the line federally, but probably like George and his association, we then immediately started pivoting to state. And the good news is we have a very large coalition. We've got a bill filed for liability protection. Both our governor and lieutenant governor have made this a priority of theirs. And it's not really even about causation with COVID, right? That's really hard to predict. It's very hard to find. We've seen this with contact tracing. But what we don't want is small businesses to be burdened with lawsuits. I mean, that's really where we do not have the resources in a small business to fight a lineup of trial lawyers preparing to sue small businesses. And so I was asked this morning if this was something I thought would clear the legislature and be signed into law. And I do. I think there's tremendous momentum. I think there is a very large coalition. And it's the right thing to do. If a business is doing and following the guidelines to keep their customers and employees safe, they should not have to deal with frivolous lawsuits they can't afford to defend themselves. So I do think Texas will come through with a liability shield. And as I said, that the bill is there and it looks very good. And I think we have a lot of support.
Great. That's good news. I hope so. I mean, it's a concern. We don't want trial lawyers getting rich off of suing businesses. I haven't heard it because I'm always worried that's going to become a problem.
Yeah, you can feel it starting to move.
Yeah. Well, I hope that as COVID kind of declines, we will be okay. George, I want to get this one to you. Economic impact payments. Not a lot of people know what those are, but talk to us about it. How has it impacted small businesses?
Sure. Real quickly, if I could just jump on the liability shield.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it affects you too, of course.
For us.
Yeah.
At the federal level on the Cornyn bill, working with the coalition that Emily mentioned, the same here at the state level. So we were thrilled to have Governor Abbott announce it as one of his emergency items during the State of the State address a few weeks back. And I, like Emily, I share the huge optimism that this is going to be something that actually passes and will help small businesses and protect small businesses and any business that's just been open and doing the right thing and in their community from frivolous lawsuits as it relates to COVID. So just wanted to put in a plug for that. As far as economic impact payments, look, we'll leave the targeted nature of any of these to the policymakers and lawmakers in Congress. I think on a general basis, economic impact payments have been helpful throughout this crisis. To the people that have gotten them, and they've helped keep people afloat for businesses like retailers, grocery stores that serve communities. It's helped keep people coming in and spending money and taking care of themselves and their families. So that's generally sort of our thought about it. And if in the next round, it's I guess going to be on the House floor tonight, and then ultimately pass out of the Senate after they strip the minimum wage portion out of it. I think any more direct payments or stimulus to individuals is going to be something that's helpful in terms of, should it go to people who don't need it? No, of course not. But those details are left to you and your colleagues. But in general, it's been a good thing, and it's helped kind of keep things going while there's been so much uncertainty over the last 11 months.
Okay. And Congressman, can I just add, I think and we agree, right? Because we can actually see a tie when those payments come out to some increase, especially in our quick serve restaurants. I think there's some data that I just saw that shows that sort of the high end of the spectrum that was eligible to get those payments are holding on to that money. They're not spending it. And the low end is spending it, right? And so I think we have to be very cautious as we put more money into the system, that we're really doing it in a targeted way that is going to stimulate the economy, right? We don't want people just sitting on that money, because that's not going to help me, because they're not going to come in restaurants and start to spend.
Yeah, that's for sure. We've seen savings increase dramatically.
Yes.
On people, and supposed to get these payments. It's like, oh well, I mean, there's a lot of people. I don't want to get to kind of the direct cash payments, but why am I against them? Why don't I want to just give out money? Imagine that. Imagine that's popular. Who would have thought? But look, there's well over 100 million people that got those payments and have never lost their job. Never lost their job. I get in some cases, decreased wages. That's if they're hourly workers, that is true. But then we should focus on that. There's ways to do that. Maybe make them eligible to apply for some form of unemployment or something like that. And for a lot of independent contractors, they are able to apply. So it's we've got to stop buying voters off, and we have to stop rewarding it as Americans. It's not the American way. We don't have an endless amount of money. Okay. But in this case, this is a good intro to the next question, because look, money's just going to the wrong places sometimes. So a question from James, will there be prosecution of companies who defrauded the PPP program? And of course, yes, we have to. Anyone guilty of fraud, the program, of course, just like anything, right? There's going to be some kind of abuse. According to DOJ last year, the DOJ fraud unit, which spearheads the federal effort to combat PPP fraud, resulted in 67 cases involving 97 defendants in the 9 months after the passage of the CARES Act. Likely others that are still under investigation. Relatively small number compared to the number of loans made, but it is, keep in mind, it's also a deterrent, and less likely anybody's going to defraud it after they see the DOJ is actually coming after you. Got to root it out. There's a number of ways in which Congress and the federal government have exercised oversight of COVID relief funding as well, including the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, which is a government entity that coordinates with Inspector Generals, the House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Crisis, and the Government Accountability Office, the GAO. Been a lot of frustration with the current administration since they've been slow to share details on the amount of funding still available in each program, which is huge for oversight. It's essential for two things. One, because I'm not going to vote for this tonight. I'm not going to vote for this $1.9 trillion package when I know there's hundreds of billions of dollars still in these accounts unspent. And we've asked repeatedly for the administration to just tell us how much is in them. They won't tell us. So just from a basic policy and governing perspective, you have to know what's in there already. And from an oversight perspective, to make sure there's not fraud, you have to know what's in there. You have to be able to see it. And this administration will not release that. It's really unforgivable. Okay, we are at an hour. And really appreciate our guests, Emily and George. You guys have been absolutely fantastic. I want to remind everybody in attendance that our office can help with the SBA and other federal programs. Make sure to reach out to the local office if you need help with any federal agency. And we have the best caseworkers in America, I think, pretty sure. They are fantastic. They have helped so many people. It's the best part about having a congressional office. There's a lot of customer service that goes on there. A lot of angry people call with customer service, unrelated customer service requests. But there are things we can actually help with, and working with federal agencies is what they're very, very good at. So, Emily, George, any last remarks?
Yeah, I would just say two things. Congressman, thank you, because you really have been, you're right. We have a lot of members that come to you because they're desperate, and your office has been amazing. So thank you for continuing to lead. And I would say to everyone listening, no matter if you want to eat inside, outside, take it to go, eat it in your car, on a scooter, please go to a restaurant.
Don't eat on a scooter.
Those Lime scooters, have a taco. I don't care where you do it, but please go see your local restaurant. They need you now more than ever, especially if we just look back. They stepped up again last week. They were feeding hospital workers. They were feeding frontline workers. They were forced to empty their freezers again. God willing, business interruption helps, but they need you, these small business owners. So please make them a part of your weekend. And just don't forget about them as we start to make this turn, which we do think we're starting to see.
Yeah, I would agree. When you visit your grocery store, thank the grocery workers that you see all throughout the stores. They've been at it all these 11 months. They have great risk to themselves. So keep those stores open to keep the shelf stocked. With that, though, Congressman Crenshaw, thanks so much for the opportunity. You're a friend to retail and a friend to TRA. We always appreciate the opportunity to visit with you and your team, and anything we can do for you and be a resource to you going forward, as always, happy to help.
Thank you all. Thank you, everybody who stayed on and participated. We had a lot of people. So these are great. And we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you. Bye, guys.